Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dal. Patch 10.1 is finally here, together with a brand new endgame seasonal content, featuring even more updates to the crowd favorite Mythic Plus dungeons. This season, however, will be different from the last. Season 2 will not feature any new seasonal affix. Instead, this season holds a whole new array of dungeons and bosses for everyone to learn. Season 2 will retire certain affixes like Quaking and Explosive, while introducing 3 new modifiers and adjusting a handful of existing ones. This means that Season 2 will be filled with fresh new challenges, but also exciting new loot for everyone to collect. To help you better prepare for Season 2 Mythic Plus dungeons, I put together this guide which goes over all of the most important mechanics of every encounter and how your dungeon groups should handle them in order to overcome these brand new instances successfully. But right before we get into this dungeon guide, most of you guys watching these are still not subscribed. However, the more of you are mine, the more of you do. So let's keep it going. Subscribe to the channel and ring the bell if you're watching these videos anyway, especially if you want to get more regular content regarding all of the newest Dragonflight updates and changes going forward. First, I want to go over the Dragonflight dungeons that are featured in Season 2. Starting with Uldaman, a Legacy tier, with the first boss of the Lost Dwarves. The dwarves fight is fairly simple. Each dwarf has a handful of abilities which need to be dealt with separately. Olaf is the tankier of the 3, keen on protecting his allies with the defensive bulwark, which should be interrupted. Otherwise spread out when he casts Ricochet and Shield. Eric the Swift is the mobile of the bunch, so stay out of his Skullcracker charges. Balog has a nasty cleave and will be up to the tank to face him away from your party. When the dwarves reach low health, they will hop into their longboat and begin to bombard your party, which leaves fire patches on the ground. Try to keep the dwarves stacked together and avoid getting blasted by the searing cannon fire. Next, we have Bromok, who will call for reinforcements throughout the encounter, summoning Stone Vault ambushers and a Geomancer. Try to get the Geomancer to come closer with the Death Knight grip or by interrupting his casting. Be sure to take a step back when the boss uses Thundering Slam. And make sure to focus down Quaking totems early. Breaking the totems limits party damage and stuns all foes for a limited time. Next, we have Sentinel Talandras. When the Sentinel reaches 100 energy, they will cast Titanic Empowerment, which makes them extremely deadly. The only way to prevent the empowerment is by stunning the boss before they reach full energy. This can be accomplished by class stun effects or by running the boss into resonating orbs. But be sure to not get knocked back into any of the orbs when the boss casts Crushing Stomp. Up next is Amberon. During this encounter, you'll want to dodge all fiery orbs slowly floating towards your party, and spread out for unstable Embers circles, and have the tank face Searing Clap in a safe direction. Once Amberon reaches 100 energy, he will shield himself in the center of the room and begin to purge the boss arena. As with all the other mechanics, avoid fire at all costs. During this phase, chip away the 4 keepers found in the outskirts of the room. Once all the keepers are downed, you can go back to doing the same thing from the start of the encounter. Finally, we have the Chrono Lord Dios. Throughout this encounter, the room will be filled with sands. Standing in the sand causes you to take damage, so be sure to avoid it. The boss will knock your party back with the Wind Buffet, and will use Sand Breath Frontal in the direction of the tank, and will debuff allies with Time Sink, which needs to be dispelled, healed, or mitigated with a defensive cooldown. Periodically, the boss will begin to rewind time flow. During this time, players can soak up any of the sand in the room to create space to stand, and while soaking sand, you get a massive haze buff, which helps you take down Chrono Lord much quicker. The next Dragonflight instance is Neltharus, starting with Magma Tusk. The most important mechanic of this encounter is to position the boss away from any lava pools. While standing in lava patches, the boss gains additional damage, but becomes a ton more manageable if you can keep him away from any of the fires. Good positioning makes frontals like Lava Spray, Magma Eruptions Burn, and Blazing Charge a lot less threatening, as well as the lava waves flowing from Blazing Charge, which should be avoided as best as possible. Next, we have Chargath. During this encounter, avoid all magma waves, and brace when the boss targets you with Dragon Strike. During the encounter, the boss will chain 3 targets, usually the DPS, with Grounding Spear. Players hit by the spear will have a chain attached to them until it is broken. Afterwards, the boss will channel Fiery Focus at the tank, attacking them wildly. Run the boss through the chains to break the assault, though be careful since every chain break will deal a large bit of damage to your entire party. Breaking the boss's focus with 3 chain breaks causes them to become stunned and take increased damage for a short amount of time. Next we have Forge Master Gorek, whose boss mechanics are more similar to that of a dance. First, the boss will hammer his forge, which deals large group-wide damage. Then 3 players will be selected with blazing Aegis. Players hit by the Aegis will radiate fire around them in the shape of an X, based on the player's position and the direction they are facing. Players hit by the fire and the Aegis take additional fire damage over time. Next, the boss hammers the tank with heated swings, knocking them back then leaping on their location, which leaves a lava pool on the ground. Afterwards, the forge begins to vent, which sends out 4 storm swirls for everyone to dodge. From there on, the fight repeats in the same boss rotation until the Forge Master has finally fallen. Finally, we have the Warlord Sarga. Avoid the boss's frontal cleaves and focus down any adds she spawns, and pay attention to the party members afflicted by molten gold. When the boss energy bar reaches 100, she will cast a magma shield. During this time, the boss radiates fire damage all throughout the room. Your goal is to break the shield as soon as possible, and the best way to do that is by using the treasures and trinkets around the room. Some of these trinkets will deal damage from range, while others need to be used up close. Be sure you're avoiding fiery swirls while you're trying to break the shield with treasures. Picking up treasures leaves you cursed, which causes additional damage. It is best to bring a class which can deal with curses, like shamans, druids, and mages. After breaking the shield, boss will take additional damage for a short amount of time, so save your cooldowns to maximize their effectiveness. The next encounter is Halls of Infusion, starting with the Watcher Iridius. This boss begins the encounter in a critically injured state. Any classes which have an execute damage profile can take advantage of this encounter. During stage 1, the boss will infect allies with power overload. When overload is removed, it leaves a power field on the ground, which should be avoided. The Watcher will cast Static Surge, which will require some healing, send out Sparks of Volleys, which should be avoided, and slam the tank with Titanic Fist, which should be faced away from the party. When the boss drops even lower in health, he will attempt to make his last stand, channeling Ablative Barrier, which needs to be removed. To remove the barrier, you'll need to destroy 3 nullification devices near the boss's location, so that their nullifying pulse removes the Watcher's barrier. Afterwards, the fight continues, but the boss have become more empowered, gaining strength the longer the ablative barrier was up during the last stand. Next, we have the Gulping Goliath. During this encounter, you may need a class which can remove Swag Toxin. If the Swag Toxin reaches 10 stacks, it will kill a player immediately. The boss and the Swaglets he summons will apply Swag Toxin when attacking. Periodically, the boss will get hungry, hoping to gulp down a friend or a foe. If the boss does not feast, he will become hangry, which makes him a lot more deadly. Make sure that a party member gets gulped down by the boss. Being gulped deals damage and will apply 3 stacks of Swag Toxin, so be sure to manage your group's poisons. And try to avoid belly slams at all costs. Next up is Kajin the Unyielding. You will notice that in the boss room there are ice boulders. Some boulders are intact while others are cracked. Stay away from the cracked boulders and use intact boulders to avoid boss's hailstorm. Position away from intact boulders so that they don't get hit by Frost Cyclone. After Hailstorm, the boss will cast Glacial Surge. Be sure to move back and forward to avoid the Rings of Frost. And throughout the encounter, healers will need to manage Polar Winds, which will deal heavy amounts of group-wide damage. Finally, we have the Primal Tsunami. During this encounter, avoid infused globules, and try to move away from them before they even spawn on your location. Tanks will need to bolster themselves every time the boss will cast Squall Buffet, and rush back to the boss while fighting against its Focus Deluge. Throughout this encounter, the boss's energy bar will fill. Once filled to full, all party members will get flung away in all directions. The party will need to regroup back at the boss's location while dodging globules and crashing Tsunami. Once you cross the gauntlet, defeat the 4 Primalist Infusers to bring the boss back. While channeling Infusers increases the boss damage by 1% every 5 seconds, but makes the Primalist a lot more harmless to deal with. Interrupting the Primalist prevents them from infusing the boss, but causes them to deal heavy damage to your party instead. Decide on how you want to deal with Infusers ahead of the encounter. The final Dragonflight dungeon of Season 2 is Brackenhide Hollow. Before you can engage the first boss of Brackenhide, you will need to free 5 Tuskers trapped around the Gnoll encampments. The first boss of Brackenhide is Hacklaw's Warband, where you'll face off against 3 Gnoll village chiefs. Each chief will have a set of mechanics which needs to be dealt with individually, with most boss mechanics closely overlapping. Rira Hacklaw has a wide cleave auto attack, which the tank will want to face away from your party. Rira also blaze storms periodically, so do your best to avoid it. And tanks will want to get in front of Rira when they cast Savage Charge, which fixates on one of your party members, unless the fixated player can avoid its damage with their own personal immunities. DPS players will want to interrupt Trick Totem, making sure they don't heal their Gnolls with healing rapids and reduce the impact of Earth Bolts if available. Be sure to focus down the Hex Trick Totems to break your party out of its polymorphs. Healers will want to focus on Gashtooth, who will assault your allies with Gash Frenzy, leaving them bleeding until they're almost fully healed. Gashtooth will mark your allies for butchery, so be sure to give them extra support. And if possible, seek to remove decayed senses applied by Gashtooth, while trying to keep your party mostly healthy, otherwise the bosses will gain bonus damage through prey on the weak aura. Finally, when either of the boss's health drops to 15%, they begin to frenzy, so be sure to cleave them down as evenly as possible. The next boss is Gutshot, which will call hyenas throughout the encounter. The boss will barrage your party with ensnaring traps. Try to avoid stepping on any of the traps and instead run any loose hyenas through them, especially useful when hyenas are fixated on certain players. Try to focus down the boss while cleaving down any nearby hyenas, and have the tank brace themselves whenever the boss casts Gutshot knockback. Next we have Treemouth. During this encounter, watch out for Decay, Spray, and Vine Whip frontals, and be sure to stop decaying slimes from casting Gushing Ooze. When the boss reaches 100 energy, they'll cast Grasping Vines, pulling all players to the boss's location. Afterwards, the boss will attempt to consume a player near him. Failing to consume sets them into a starving frenzy, which makes them a lot more deadly. Consuming an ally satiates them, but causes eaten allies to suffer large amounts of damage. It is best to rotate which targets get consumed by the boss next, and be sure to use a defensive when you get eaten, and try not to get eaten twice in a row. Finally, we have the Catriarch Wratheye. The most important mechanic of this boss is to slay her totems as soon as they are up. Totems will apply a Withering Rot to your entire party, which will deal periodic damage while making your party weaker. Any targets infected by Rot will empower the boss when she casts Decaying Strength, causing her to grow stronger and stronger until the boss is simply overwhelming. The best course of action is to beat the totems before their cast goes off. As a team, you can't allow yourselves to fall behind on this encounter. Tanks will want to brace themselves whenever the boss casts Decay Strike, and the party should try to stay away from any choking rock clouds. As for the seasonal non-Dragonflight dungeons, we start things off with the crowd favorite pirate-themed Freehold. The first boss is Sky Captain Crag. To summon this boss, you'll need to defeat the Irontide Enforcers guarding the boss arena. During stage 1, Sky Captain will launch a mounted assault, shooting his pistol at your party while charging to players with his bird. Once he reaches 75% health, the boss dismounts. The bird will provide additional support with Vile Bombardment while charging across the field with Dive Bomb, which should be avoided. Crag will fire his pistol at players randomly, so avoid stacking close together or behind one another to limit pistol's cleave capabilities. Players hit by pistol will suffer Azeroid Powder Shot, which can be dispelled or managed by a healer. Next, we have the Council of Captains. And unlike the original BFA version of this dungeon, the RP elements of this encounter have been removed. Captain Jolly will always be fighting right beside you, facing off against Eudora as well as Raoul. Eudora will be firing her blunderbuss at your party, and will leap to a corner of the boss's arena while blasting frontal grape shots. Raoul will cast Blackout Barrel, which will incapacitate an ally until you destroy the barrel, and back away when he's about to cast Barrel Smash. Throughout the encounter, the Barkeep will toss out Freehold Brews. Allies can be buffed by the brews, increasing either their crit or haste stat, while green Caustic Brews should be avoided. Try to keep both of the bosses in the Caustic Brew so that they take additional damage. Next, we have Trothak, otherwise known as the Shark Boss. During this encounter, the boss will toss sharks at nearby players. The sharks are relentless and will chase you down endlessly. try to run the sharks through Chum to slow them down momentarily. Be careful of the shark's location, as the boss will periodically charge back to them to pick up the sharks before launching them again. And take a step back when the boss casts his infamous Shark Tornado. Finally, we have Harlan Sweetie, where the boss's mechanics become more frequent and more deadly the lower his health becomes. The boss will mark a player and then several players with cannon barrage, which needs to be avoided with careful movement. Help your parties stop Iron-Tide Grenadiers in their tracks before they reach their target location. Avoid Swiftwind Saber Tornadoes if at all possible. And your healers will want to keep an eye on any targets afflicted by Whirling Dagger. The next dungeon is Underrot, starting with Elder Leexa. Keep Leexa interrupted, limiting the use of Blood Bolt ability. And be sure to dodge her Sanguine Feast and Creepin' Rot frontals. Finally, focus down her Blood Mirrors, which will mimic all of her abilities. Next, we have Krogma the Infested, where most boss's abilities will spawn blood ticks during the encounter. These ticks should be stepped on by your party before they can mature into a real threat. The boss will fixate on a player and charge right past them. Indigestion Frontal will be directed for the tank to mitigate. After his energy bar fills up, the boss will go into a wild tantrum, dealing group-wide damage while spawning a ton of ticks throughout the boss arena. Up next is Sporecaller Xantia, where the boss arena will be surrounded by mushrooms. These mushrooms need to be cleared before the boss casts Festering Harvest. You can clear the mushrooms by running through them, though doing so without an immunity can guarantee an early death. It is best to clear mushrooms with boss's mechanics. The DPS will be targeted by Upheaval, which you could place directly on the mushrooms. Tanks will be slammed by the boss's shockwaves, which could also destroy any nearby mushrooms. And be sure to avoid any spores flying all across the boss's arena. Finally, we have the Unbound Abomination, which cannot be defeated through regular means. The boss will absorb all damage taken. Damage causes the boss to generate more energy. Once the boss reaches 100 energy, they spawn 2 Blood Visages. Defeating Blood Visages damages the boss's health bar, and you'll need to defeat 6 Visages to overcome this encounter. Throughout this fight, the boss will spread rot and decay in the form of great puddles which fill the room, floating spores which explode on contact, and afflicting your party with a decaying corruption. A nearby Titan Keeper will attempt to hold the rot at bay, presenting your party with the golden circles to cleanse all of your allies, while focusing down any blood visages with searing fire. Next, we have the Sky Temple of Vortex Pinnacle, starting with the Grand Vizier. Try to stay in the middle of the surrounding hurricanes, dodging rogue cyclone fragments, interrupting as many lightning bolts as possible, while positioned around the boss evenly, so that the lurking tempests do not get to strike on any of your dungeon party. And take a step back when the cyclones close in and position together, and use defensives or party-wide cooldowns to survive that part of the encounter. Next, we have the Dragon of Altharis. During this encounter, you'll want to face the boss so that the winds are at your back. Facing the winds gives you a red debuff, which means you're constantly taking damage while your haste is greatly reduced. Facing in the right direction gives you a green debuff, which increases your haste instead. Avoid Chilling Breath Frontal, which will target a random player. When the boss casts Downburst, a circle will grow from that location. You'll need to jump into a nearby Twisting Winds to jump over the circle. Certain abilities like the Mage's Blink or the Warlock's Teleport will also work in this situation. And finally, we have Assad. During this encounter, try to give each other some space when targeted by Chain Lightning, and focus down any nearby Skyfall Nova as a group. When the boss casts Static Cling, you can jump towards the end of the cast to avoid becoming rooted. And when the boss places an unstable grounding field, make sure to get under it, otherwise risk being fried by lightning. And finally, we have Neltharion's Lair, not to be confused with Neltharus. The first boss is Rakmora. During this encounter, the boss will create skitters which need to be dealt with quickly. When the boss casts Shatter, all skitters will pop at once, dealing a ton of group-wide damage, on top of what Shatter already does. When skitters die, they leave an acid puddle on the ground, so the tank will want to move the boss periodically to create more room for your party. When the boss uses Shatter, the ground will be covered in crystals. Moving around in these crystals is incredibly painful, so position somewhat close to the boss as a melee. The tank will have to aim the Razor Shard Frontal away from the party, but can move out at the last second to avoid the incoming damage. Next we have Uldaman. During this encounter, watch out for the strike of the mountain, moving out of the hand's direction as soon as possible, and focus down bellowing idols to reduce the risk of falling debris. When the boss energy hits 100, the totem minigame will begin. The boss will jump in a center, disguise himself as one of the totems, and shuffle around 5 totems which will pulse out with fallen debris. Try to pay attention to the right totem and focus it down, while lightly spreading in order to avoid hitting each other with AoE damage. Next we have Neltharus, which is a very healing intensive fight. Throughout this encounter, your allies will be consistently taking poison damage, trying to avoid acid pulls and getting hit by rocks from above. Any ranged DPS should try to position towards the middle of the room to create as many acid pulls as possible. Shortly into the encounter, more trogs will join the fight. They will need to be focused down by the DPS players before they reach the boss's location. Tanks should position on top of the boss and stay in the melee range until the boss casts Spiked Tongue. Run away from the boss and use any of the acid pulls to slow you down, then return back in the melee when no longer being eaten. And finally, we have Darkroll. Throughout this encounter, the boss will spawn crystal spikes under the player's location. The spikes are extremely important in this encounter, and you will be positioning around them in order to avoid most of the boss's mechanics. The tank should face the boss's frontals away from your party and away from any active crystals. Darkroll will periodically spawn a molten char skin, which will fixate on one of your party members. Run the char skin into a crystal spike to stun it, making it more vulnerable to damage, and focus it down immediately. When the boss's energy fills 100, he'll cast Magma Wave. You'll want to see cover behind one of the crystal spikes to avoid all Magma Wave damage. And that's going to be my full guide for the Season 2 dungeons of the patch 10.1. I want to thank all of you so much for watching this video and I hope you guys enjoyed. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. As per usual, if you guys enjoyed this video or found it informative, go ahead and give it a thumbs up. I would very much appreciate it. And as always, in the description of every single video and live stream, we have a link to our Discord community channel. Probably the best place to reach out to me directly in case you want to let me know what you thought about this video or hang out with the rest of the community to discuss some of the upcoming changes. Join our Discord to become part of the community. But otherwise, thank you all so much for watching this video. I do hope you guys enjoyed. Let me know all of your thoughts down below. And as always, I'll see all of you guys in another video.